Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage issues relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alissha Watley.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Mike Broad.
All right, Tim, honey, what's the scenario?
Homeowners policy. Unbeknownst to the insured, bees had constructed a large hive in the attic. One day, the insured noticed a sappy substance dripping down the walls into the interior. She then discovered the hive in the attic and then discovered a large area of the wall underneath that was damaged by honey. She submits an insurance claim. The adjuster looks closely through the policy and sees in her policy two potential exclusions. One for birds, rodents, or insects, and another one for waste products and secretions by any animals. Question: is any part of this loss covered? So as far as home infestations go, I guess this one doesn't seem too nightmarish to me. Everybody likes honey. Everybody likes honeybees.
We do.
We don't?
Yeah.
Bees are a vital part of the environment, apparently.
They pollinate for us.
They do.
I like honey. It's tasty.
Honey
And
is good.
hopefully, yeah, and maybe that homeowner could take some of that honey, process it, can it, and sell it as some kind of farmer's marketplace or something in her local community. Look at that. A win-win.
I think that's a great idea.
So, I don't have any other bee stories. I try to avoid them.
I don't have a bee story, but I have a story that happened just a couple weekends ago. Sitting around watching college football with my son, enjoying the games, and all of a sudden we heard this loud knocking, like, I don't know, thought something malfunctioned on the chair or something. I kept hearing it. And then it sounded like it was outside and loud. I'm like, well, what the heck is this? So I go out my front door and look up, and there on our siding, right over there, there was a woodpecker going to town on our wood siding. Go figure.
So what'd you do about it?
We frightened him away and made sure he went a number of trees away. Has not come back, so I think we're safe. And then last weekend I patched it up and did a little paint job, Tim. I repaired it myself.
Right, because you know, Mike, that the policy excludes birds.
I don't know that, Tim. I just figured it was a small job. I'd do it myself. So can we explore this further? Are you sure it's not covered, Tim? And why not?
Pretty sure. So animal related losses,
Right.
some are covered and some aren't. The general idea here is that insurance covers risks and not costs. So when you buy a home, you do that with the understanding that there's going to be ongoing expenses, and pest control is expected as a maintenance cost. I don't think there's a house anywhere on the planet that isn't susceptible to some type of pest. So because of that, common pests tend to be excluded, but unusual chance, one in a lifetime accidents, like say a deer crashing through your window, there's nothing routine about that, and companies tend to be more willing to cover something like that. So that's the general idea, but as always, the policy language is the written contract, so the policy language is ultimately what controls. And in all risk coverage, for coverage A on the dwelling, the insurance company is going to have to point to an exclusion before they can deny coverage. So what you'll usually see is some exclusions that list certain types of animals whose damage would be excluded.
And what animals would those be?
Well, in this policy, it was birds, rodents, and insects. So in our hypothetical, the adjuster saw that exclusion first. And, let's start with just the bees. That we could probably break this loss into two components. There's removing the bees from the house, and then there's replacing the wall because the wall was damaged by the honey. So we'll separate these. We'll start with the bees, and we'll go to that exclusion for birds, rodents, and insects. Is a bee a bird?
No.
Flies.
Not a bird. Is
Oh.
a bee a rodent?
No.
No.
I'm
Is a
still not
bee
sure.
an is a bee an insect?
Yes. Technically.
Yeah, no, you're on the right track there, because I think there's two ways you could look at it. Are we looking at the scientific classification? I remember high school biology, it was kingdom, phylum, was it? All the way down to species, and there's certain subclasses, and insects is somewhere in that spectrum.
Mhm.
And insects, defined by their hard outer bodies called exoskeletons, and 3 body segments: head, thorax, abdomen, 3 pairs of legs, and 2 antennae. And
All right.
that does describe a bee, and a bee is officially, scientifically, an insect.
I don't know. I'm
Yay, I
still going with,
passed.
I'm going with bird. you're all
Got
wrong.
wings.
Now, interestingly, we don't have to go right to scientific definitions. An insurance policy, there's nothing, I mean, whoever drafted that is not a biologist. Whoever took out the insurance is not a biologist. So some might prefer to interpret the policy as just how a layman would think. Would a layman think a bee is an insect? I would consider myself a layman on that question. And I would say probably yes. If I talk to someone in real life, I would use the word insect to refer to a bee.
Mhm.
You too?
A bug.
A bug. Ah,
I think a
interesting.
bee-
Bug
bees
is
are-
bug is another entirely different. I think it's a subset of insects scientifically, but in layman's terms, yeah, it's kind of a bug.
Mhm.
So you know, I think depending on the court, you'll see either of those interpretations. One federal court recently in Alabama said spiders could be excluded as an insect, even though spider is not technically an insect, it's an arachnid. The court thought that insects in popular usage does include spiders. So luckily for our purposes here, either way we go, I think it's pretty safe to say that a bee is an insect, not a bird, Mike, but an insect. So I think we can say confidently that there is no coverage to remove the bees from the premises.
So what about now the bees had to somehow, did they like perhaps make a hole in the siding or something to build their nest? Would that be something that might be considered, Tim? Or
I
is
would
that
say
still
that would
insect
be
damage?
that would be equally well excluded, because that would be a loss directly caused by insects if the bees created that opening.
Okay.
I'm on the bee side because I don't think they could create an opening like that.
There's
I don't see
carpenter
them
bees.
burrowing through anything.
Maybe they work together. The carpenter bees work together with the honeybees in order to help produce their noble
Now we're talking about 2
nectar.
types of insects.
honey. Yes, see, it could work.
Okay.
Or my buddy, the woodpecker, might have helped by saying, hey, I'll produce the whole, you produce the honey, we'll work together, get something going here. That's why they're much more noble than just your average bug. And that's why I'm going with birds still. You guys still haven't convinced me.
All right. Well, I'm going with insects and I'm sticking with my story.
Okay. What about the honey?
Yeah, so the honey, so component number 2. So we could start by thinking about, we just said a bee is an insect. You could say it may be indirect. It was caused by the insects. And this is where we get to the ensuing loss clause. So Mike, I'm sure that you've heard of the ensuing loss clause and dealt with it back in your adjuster days.
Yeah, always confused me though, Tim. So, I mean, my limited understanding, again, that's why I moved to casualty really quick, was that let's say there was your, we'll call them an insect since I didn't win
Been
this
overruled.
argument, correct? But then there's some covered loss that happens. Is that then ensuing loss covered under the policy? Is that partially correct, Tim, or?
It's partially correct. The policy says losses caused by insects are excluded, but
Right.
then most homeowners policies after that insects exclusion go on to say, but losses that ensue from insects are not excluded. So it's kind of a language entanglement there. Caused by insects excluded, ensue from insects covered. It's hard to really figure out what we're doing there. And the most common approach is to look at the degree of separation between the exclusion and the final damage. So we're getting kind of abstract here. So I'll just go right to an example that will clear it up. Say the honey dripped down, got to an electrical wire that caused a short, that caused a spark, that caused a big fire, and now the whole house burns down.
Right.
Okay, that would clearly be an ensuing loss because there's so many chain of events, there's so many events in the chain, and we finally got to this ensuing loss. They're two totally separate things, fire and insects. Now, honey is harder because honey is not itself the bees, but it's closely related to bees. That's what honeybees do. They make honey, and honey is routinely comes out of hives. So I wouldn't say it's an inevitable consequence of a bee infestation, but it certainly is closely related. So I would say this could go either way. I'm not going to make the call on the ensuing loss. There is one court from Arizona, and this was the Arizona Supreme Court, no less, that dealt with this exact same fact pattern. We had bees, hive, and honey, and that Arizona court said the honey was an ensuing loss. So if you're in Arizona, you should definitely know about that case. If you're in a different state, you should know of that case, but you should probably check your own state's ensuing loss cases.
Hey, Tim, didn't you say early on that there was also something about secretions or something that wasn't covered?
Right. So the second exclusion, so we're going to say that the insects exclusion, let's assume we say it doesn't apply to the honey. Now we can look at the second exclusion, waste products or secretions by any animals. So does anyone have any thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I guess.
Is honey technically a secretion or
You're
waste?
definitely on the right track. It's not a waste product because
Right.
it's food for them. They need it. They're not wasting any of it. But secretion is harder. I think we're getting right back into this. What is a secretion scientifically? And what is
Yes,
a
please.
secretion when I talk to my friend? So a secretion scientifically is, let's see, it's a substance that comes out of a cell or gland of a living organism.
Wow.
Okay, now if this came out of the hive, if the hive's not a living organism, you kind of have to trace the whole the honey making process where the bees go get the nectar, they put it in their special stomachs, they fly back to the hive, they regurgitate it. At that point, it's still nectar, but it's undergoing chemical changes. They flap their wings, it starts to evaporate, thicken, more chemical changes, and then in the hive, it finally becomes honey, and then there's just such a buildup that it drips out. So I would argue that the hive isn't really secreting the honey. Maybe the flowers are secreting nectar, maybe the bees are secreting something that goes in the nectar, but the hive really isn't secreting honey. So I think it would be challenging to argue that honey is a secretion in this sense. The argument could be made, but I think it would be challenging.
Hey, Tim, to go back to your story there, you said the bees did what? They flapped what?
They flap their wings in the hive, which creates all sorts of wind and evaporation to make that watery nectar turn into the thicker honey.
What else flaps its wings to cause things to happen?
Wasps.
Yeah,
Birds.
Lots of insects, I would say, Mike. Lots of
Oh.
insects flap their wings.
I don't think so. Birds.
I want to know how you did on your biology tests back in the day.
I was a psychology major. Didn't care much about this stuff.
All right, so Tim, what can we take away from this scenario? Because we need to get away from the bird bees.
The birds and the bees, right?
Or the bee birds.
Okay, recap. A homeowner found bees in the attic and honey dripping down the walls. The bee removal is excluded. The assuming the policy contains an insects exclusion or maybe nesting or infestation. However, the honey damage is more questionable. There are a few common exclusions we can at least think about, assuming that exclusion is in the policy. First, insects exclusion. But honey dripping from a hive might be an ensuing loss. I think different courts would handle it differently. The Arizona Supreme Court thought that it was an ensuing loss. Second, we could look at this secretions exclusion. But again, honey could be deemed not a secretion, at least in a technical sense, and courts tend to interpret exclusions narrowly. You know, a third one that we didn't even talk about and did not have time to talk about today because it deserves its own entire episode would be something like the pollutants or contaminants exclusion. That has a huge range of interpretations. Again, we could maybe do its own episode. So yeah, those are my takeaways from today.
So Tim, if I'm an adjuster who wants to know more about this topic, where can I go?
Who wants to know more about the birds and the bees? Where can you go?
That's a whole other topic.
PLRB.org, and PLRB members can access all of PLRB's legal materials. We have a complete annotation on all of the animal-related exclusions with a breakdown of case law by the state, and that is an excellent resource for an adjuster who has a question about a loss caused by some type of animal.
And I'm sure, Alissha, on the educational side, and I'm sorry, I got you.
No, I was going to say, Mike, where else can we find it? Yeah.
We might not have all the cool stuff that Tim has on the legal research side, but I know we'll have some cool information on ensuing loss and kind of how that all works. So check us out under the education tab.
Awesome. And gentlemen, it's been a sweet time talking about bees. So thank you, Tim. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Alissha.
All right, we'll see you next time.
All right.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.